So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have Janitzi, the Florida State Director of Hispanic Federation, with us for a couple of words.
Thank you so much, Frederick, and we welcome everyone who is joining us after our morning break. Thank you so much. We have been in a very exciting program where we have panelists, legislators and representatives, and community leaders talking about important issues that affect and impact our daily life as a Puerto Rican here in the state of Florida. And with that said, I wanted to present our dear colleague, Frederick Velez, who is actually the National Civic Engagement Director for Hispanic Federation. And he will be moderating this panel and presentations around Puerto Rican voters in Florida, the update on the voter rights, and also the Florida redistricting process in transparency. And with that, we have several panelists that will join us virtually, but also some of them sent a video. So please make sure that if you need interpretation, you can call us at the number that appears in the chat and keep it coming, those comments and questions. Enjoy. Now to you, Frederick.
So good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I'm really excited to be here. Like Janitzi said, I'm the National Director of Civic Engagement. I have been working with the Puerto Rican community in Florida since about 2012. I can't believe it's been almost 9 years. We are all here not only in the Puerto Rico Day in Tallahassee, not only to create a space for members of our Puerto Rican community to engage with elected officials, but also to learn more about our community. We want to learn a little bit more about Puerto Ricans in Florida. As you all must know, because I think it's been all over the headlines, it's been all over the coverage, our community has grown a lot in the last decade. And so also have the calls from reporters and journalists wanting to know how many Puerto Ricans live in Florida. I know that I get those calls every single election year. They want to know, how many Puerto Ricans are registered, how are they voting, who are they voting for, and what issues they care about. So if you have those questions as well, I have good news, and it's that we're going to go over some of that information. However, I do want to say a caveat, and that is that because Puerto Ricans are a subgroup of Hispanics, we don't have data that's 100% accurate. It's not as easy to find data, for example, for white or the Black community than it is for Puerto Ricans. And most of the numbers that I'm going to give are an estimate. Now, I do know that there are good estimates, so I do want to say that out there. But I just want to make sure that is known. I don't want people thinking that this is, the Bible in terms of numbers. But we did a really good research and went down to get the most updated and truthful numbers. And also, I want to say that, Hispanic Federation and the Puerto Rico Day in Tallahassee are nonpartisan events. So I am going to put out some information that pertains to politics, but I just want to make sure that this is just some of the information that we've gathered, and this is not an endorsement of any party or of any candidate or, progressive or conservative views. I just want to make that very clear. So going back to 2010, if you actually do a Google search, you will probably not find a lot about the Puerto Rican community when it comes to voting and politics. And I know that might sound a little bit surprising with everything that's been happening this year and everything we've heard about the Puerto Rican community, but that was the truth. At that time, back in 2000, we had approximately 500,000 Puerto Ricans. If you jump over to 2010, our population went up to about 847,000 people. So just in 10 years, it basically doubled in size. So what happened with the population is that it kept growing, but as it kept growing, so did the share of the Puerto Rican vote of both the Hispanic group and of the whole Florida voter population. And this is something very important because when it comes to the Hispanic community, Puerto Ricans are one of the only groups specifically that as soon as we're born, we are US citizens, so that when we move to Florida, where we move to any state, we automatically can register to vote without having to go through any citizenship process. And that is why I think the Puerto Rican community captured the imagination and also the efforts of every single group that was turning out the vote in Florida. So as that increase came in the population, an increase of our voter share came in, and also an increase in media members and different political groups covering what was happening. So basically, in 20 years, we went from 500,000 people to 1.1 million residents, Puerto Rican residents in Florida. And just to put those numbers in context, right? Because I can throw out numbers and it doesn't mean nothing, but Puerto Ricans are now the largest eligible group, Hispanic group, to vote in Florida. We are not the group that has the most registered voters. That's still the Cuban community, but we are the group that has the most eligible Hispanic voters in Florida. We are also one of the youngest groups in all the nation. About 12% of all Puerto Ricans across all jurisdictions live in Florida. And now Florida has become the second jurisdiction with the most Puerto Ricans, and it's only second to the island. So we surpassed New York about 2 years ago in terms of having the most population of Puerto Ricans in the States. So now that we spoke a little bit about those numbers, I also want to work on dispelling 3 myths that I've been kind of hearing in the past 10 years. The first one is that Puerto Ricans don't vote, that we don't vote in Florida, that we move from the island, and that suddenly we forget how to vote. So it really depends on how you look at it. Because if you are comparing the numbers to the turnout that's in the island, then it is true. There is a lower turnout when compared to the island. But when you compare our turnout to all other Hispanic groups, it's only the Cuban community that turns out more than Puerto Rico. Participate. Now, having said that, our turnout rate has been increasing each year, which is a great sign. In 2008, approximately 48% of registered Puerto Rican voters went out to vote, while in 2020, that number went all the way up to 66%. So we're talking about a 20-point increase in 12 years of voter participation. And that is a part of how many registered voters. So I'm not talking about raw numbers. We're talking about the population has increased, so has increased our voter participation, which is, to me, it's amazing, but we still have a lot of work to do. So the second myth that I want to dispel is that when Puerto Ricans go out to vote, we only vote for Democrats. And this is the part of the program that I said I was going to get a little bit into politics. So like I just said for the myth number 1, it also depends on how you look at it or how you analyze it. So if you only look at the presidential level, you're definitely going to see that in the last 4 or 5 election cycles, a majority of Puerto Ricans have supported Democratic candidates. And when I say a majority of Puerto Ricans, more than 50%. It's gone up and down depending on the candidate. And that is part that's really important. For example, Donald Trump got more support in 2020 from the Puerto Rican population than in 2016. President Obama got less support in 2012 when compared to 2008. So support for a party or a candidate hasn't remained flat. It goes up and down, leading a lot of people to think that it's because we are nuanced voters and we actually look at who the candidates are. That also takes into account the fact that Puerto Ricans are the largest group in the state with the rate of non-registered, non-party affiliated voters. So we have about 33%, maybe a little bit more registered to the Democratic Party. We have about 25% of Puerto Rican voters registered to the Republican Party. But then we have a huge number of Puerto Ricans, about 30%, a third of the Puerto Rican voters who are not registered for a party. So that kind of makes it difficult for us to kind of say, okay, well, if this person is registered for X party, then we know that they're going to vote for this candidate. But that isn't the case necessarily with Puerto Rico. In 2020, for example, an estimated 70% of Puerto Ricans voted for President Joe Biden. But like I mentioned before, every analysis that we've seen shows that President Trump gained support from the Puerto Rican community and gained support from basically every Hispanic group. Additionally, another analysis that we like to say is the 2018 election, which is one that I like to point out when people say that Puerto Ricans only vote for one party. We, at least in our groups, are calling it, or we're calling it, the Soto-Scott ballot, because we saw a lot of people that voted for Senator Rick Scott for the U.S. Senate, a Republican, right? And then voted for Darren Soto as their congressman in the Democratic Party. And part of that data can also be seen when you can see that Rick Scott had more support among Puerto Rican heavy precincts than Governor DeSantis had in 2018. He also did better than President Trump in 2016 with Puerto Ricans. And when doing surveys, exit polls, and talking to Puerto Rican voters, a lot of these voters suggested that they perceive support or what they perceived as support from Senator Rick Scott towards the Puerto Rican population, and some of the actions he took after Maria were what gave them that support. And that is something really important. Bipartisan ballots in the ballot box. And that actually takes me to the last myth, which is, why does that happen? And, sometimes I hear, and I talk with legislative aides, I talk with elected officials, and I feel that sometimes there's this disconnect between what are the issues that Puerto Ricans care about and what's actually what people think that they care about. Sometimes it's like as if Puerto Rican voters have exotic needs, or they're like different from the population, but that's not true. And that is why we came up with this panels. That is why the issues that you're seeing right now in these panels are the issues that matter to the Puerto Rican community. And if you look at those issues, you'll see that they match perfectly with all the other residents in Florida and all the other subgroups you can think about. We're talking about affordable housing. We're talking about making sure that we can go to the doctor whenever we need to, that we can have a healthy lifestyle, that we can have a great education for ourselves and for our children as well. Being able to protect our environment. So all of these panels and issues that we have done today are a reflection of all those top issues for the Puerto Rican community. And that is why we wanted to do this breakdown, because the number one myth that we want to break down is that Puerto Rican voters are not like some weird subgroup that we will never know, what they want. The reality is that every single person that does the outreach and talks to our community will find out what the issues are, and will be able to connect with their Puerto Rican constituents, which is part of what we're doing these events. So in the next months, we are going to be taking deeper dives on some of these issues through our Cafecitos and Hispanic Federation. And we're also going to be doing some deeper dives on this data, because we understand that there's a big need of understanding where Puerto Rican voters are, how they feel, where they live. And we are committed to make sure that we can help everyone and share that data, because at the end of the day, it's only going to help everyone involved. And that is why I want to thank all of the elected officials who took their time today, more than 25 elected officials, to come here and spend time with us, spend time with our panelists, and find out what are the issues in our community that matter. So having said that, I am now going to introduce our first speaker, which is Ricardo Negron Almodovar. He is the Legal Services Coordinator of LatinoJustice PRLDEF, and he's here to give us some updates on voter rights and give us some updates on some of the measures on Spanish access ballots. Ricardo, how are you?
Good morning, Frederick. I'm doing well. Thank you for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here sharing this information with the attendees. Frederick, before we begin, if I might take a second, I really want to recognize and acknowledge the hurt that our Asian American communities are going through in the aftermath of what appears to be a racially motivated crime, hate crime that happened yesterday in Atlanta. So to our Asian American communities, we're with you, we see you, and we're here for you to support you.
We appreciate that, Ricardo. People don't know actually that you're one of the first people I met when I went here to work in Orlando. I still think you might have my phone number as with my old job next to it. So I just wanted to mention that real quickly. So, we were talking the other day about a process that's taken a couple of years. LatinoJustice PRLDEF, along with other organizations, community-based organizations, went to court to make sure that some counties got Spanish language access ballots. So I don't want to, give in the whole premise. So can you tell us why your organization, along with other organizations, needed to go to court, and what was the result of that after a couple of years?
Absolutely, Frederick. So for everyone's knowledge, there is the Voting Rights Act. It's a federal law. It covers all of the states, and there are certain provisions in this act that really hammers down on the type of accessibility and assistance that voters have. One of those provisions is Section 208, and that means that you can bring in whoever you need to the polling location to assist you. There's also Section 203. This section is actually guided by census numbers, which is the importance of participating in the census. And there's 13 counties here in Florida, including obviously Orange, Osceola, Seminole, other Central Florida counties, that already meet the population threshold. So that means that these counties, they provide all of the assistance required for a voter to be able to participate in the election, not just ballots, but information previous to the elections, all the forms to require your to require for your ballot, to register to vote. All of that is already provided in that minority language, in this case Spanish. There's also Section 4E. This is a section that's very particular towards the Puerto Rican community. The right to register to vote as every other American citizen that lives here. So this section provides that these individuals cannot be prohibited of their right of participating in the elections just because of that lack of understanding, that lack of the language, in this case, English. So here in Florida, there were 32 counties actually who were not complying with this section of the Voting Rights Act, Section 4E. Back in 2018, this was before the primary election, we went to court and we were able to get a preliminary injunction which ordered these counties to provide some assistance, to provide the ballots in Spanish, to provide some signage in the polling locations. But this is a process that was ongoing. And finally, this year, sometime 2.5 years later, we were able to reach a settlement with 31 out of these 32 counties. And we can share which are the counties later. But what this settlement means is that in these counties, voters, Puerto Rican voters and Spanish dominant voters will be able to have that Spanish language ballot, will be able to have the Spanish materials, and very importantly, we'll be able to have the vote by mail request forms and the vote by mail ballots also in Spanish, as well as a county specific hotline. We know here, every county has their own deadlines, every county has their own county elections. So it's very important to have a county specific hotline so that voters can get that assistance that they need. So this is the settlement in the Rivera versus Barton case. And we can share all that information. We are prepping to share it broadly. We've already shared it with the organizational plaintiff, with Hispanic Federation was an organizational plaintiff in this lawsuit. So we really hope that all of our eligible voters know this information and that the counties follow through with this settlement.
Yeah, and these are things that are important because even if you don't think about it, these are actual real wins that have consequences for our community. Thanks to what LatinoJustice PRLDEF did and other organizations, people are able to vote in Spanish. They're actually able to get a Spanish language ballot in at least 31 of the 32 counties. Maybe we'll get the 32nd county this year. We also wanted to touch quickly on, there have been some bills proposed in Tallahassee that have to do with voter rights and voter rights access. And I was hoping you could also give us an update of some of those bills and what they're proposing to do with them.
Yes. So the bill that we are, currently tracking is SB 90, and this bill, obviously, because of the pandemic and the historic nature of last year's election in the middle of a pandemic, people were rightly so very worried about their safety going out to a line in a polling location. So people were able to take advantage of things that were not new. Right here in Florida, we've had vote by mail for years now. It wasn't something that was just, poof, magically appear last year because of the pandemic. But more people obviously took advantage of it, of being able to vote from the safety of your home rather than going outside and being exposed to contracting COVID-19. What this bill is proposing, one, is that it's trying to eliminate drop boxes. Drop boxes were a very easy to use way of delivering your vote by mail ballot. That meant that you could go to any of the early polling locations and literally just deliver your ballot, and that was it. We knew that the post office was experiencing many delays, and it wasn't, you could miss the deadline for your vote to count. So this was a very safe option for people to participate in the election. So this bill is trying to eliminate the use of drop boxes. It's also trying to retroactively eliminate vote by mail applications. When you fill out your vote by mail application, you can actually select that it's not just for this upcoming election, but rather for the next few election cycles. What this bill is trying to do is that it will eliminate that. So people who have signed off to receive their vote by mail applications for, years to come will actually have to go through that process again. So that means, you're already thinking, well, I signed up for it. I don't have to do anything else other than receive my application and vote. Well, now you have to sign up to that again. That means that the burden of actually reaching out to all of these voters will fall on every supervisor of elections to every county. And realistically, it'll also fall into the hands of the community organizations that are doing the outreach, trying to get the voter turnout. We will now have to make sure that voters are making sure, did I submit my vote by mail application? Do I have to renew it? It's an extra burden, an extra step that makes it more complicated for people to, participate in the elections. Something else that it's doing is that, when we register to vote, you either have to include your Florida ID number, the last four numbers of your social security. And once you do that, if you're an eligible voter, you become an eligible voter. Now, this bill will require that if you are to request your vote by mail application, you also have to include this personal information, which is unnecessary because it's already in file. So that people might see this and not want to submit a vote by mail application because of concerns over privacy. Not everybody is going to want to share your Florida ID number, your Florida driver's number. And if you don't have one of these two identification, you might not want to share your social security number for privacy concerns, and rightly so. And then another issue with this bill is that it's trying to limit who can actually deliver those vote by mail ballots. It's trying to limit it to immediate family only. So that would leave, for example, people who are, seniors who are in care facilities, who may not have immediate family members. They rely on the efforts of community organizations and other efforts to be able to deliver their ballots because they do not have access to mobility. They do not have access to other services. So this bill really puts an extra barrier in making sure that every eligible voter is able to cast their vote in the most safe way possible.
Yeah,